Good evening, everybody. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can hear me. Good evening. Welcome, everyone. I hope you can hear me in the back. Okay, great. I'm Navina Haider. I'm the head of the Islamic department here at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you for our annual Annemarie Schimmel Memorial Lecture. Today, we are very fortunate and blessed to have an extraordinary friend, colleague, mentor, scholar amongst us to speak, and that is Dr. Layla Diba, and a very warm welcome to you, Dr. Diba. Our house is full this evening, and I think the attendance speaks for itself. We look forward with great anticipation to the talk this evening. Dr. Diba will be talking about a motif, a concept on the subject of the Gulo Bulbul, the rose and the nightingale motif in Persian art. And much as this is although an expression of Persian, quintessentially of Persian culture at certain moments, this motif has actually captivated cultures, artists, poets around the world. It is a truly global symbol. And of course, we see it very much in the art of the Ottoman world and the Mughal world, particularly in the same period that it became very popular in the Persian arts. And therefore, this idea speaks to many aspects of the collections on view upstairs in the galleries. And I hope we will all be able to see new depths and metaphors and insights into broadly the collection through this extraordinary motif that has flowered so beautifully in the Persian arts. I'd like to, of course, mention, in light of this idea of a motif that the Persian imagination, the Persian art tradition has given the world, the idea that the Persian community at this point has given the world so much in so many aspects, in so many dimensions. At this moment in time, we are very much with the Persian community. Our hearts are very much with everyone who's been affected by the current situation. And we remember joyfully the many, many contributions of Iranian art, of Persian art and culture to the world at this point. And we celebrate each and every one of them, artists and community members at this point. There's somebody here, I should mention not only just the treasures in the collection, but also the living treasures that we have. Of course, Dr. Diba is one of them. Dr. Mariam Ekhtiar in our very own department is another living treasure of the Persian community. And she will actually be giving the full introduction to Dr. Diba today. The two of them have worked together on many projects and created many amazing things together, especially on the Qajar period, which is their speciality among their many other areas of interest. So I am going to hand over to Dr. Ekhtiar to do the formal introduction in a minute. I just want to mention very practically, if you have cell phones, please turn them off right now. And also to say that this lecture will be followed by an informal reception in the room next door, and you are welcome to take the questions, any questions that you might have for the speakers and for the speaker this evening in that room, because we will shift to that area, and everyone is warmly invited to join us there. So I would just end my remarks by remembering Annemarie Schimmel, who was an extraordinary scholar of epigraphy, of poetry, of Sufism, of Persian art in a very broad and encompassing way. She was a very gifted scholar, and from a very young age, I think you can read her biography online, but she had 2 PhDs, and she had extraordinary skills in languages. She traversed the worlds that we represent in the collections through her linguistic ability and through her insights into the philosophical and spiritual traditions of all these regions, and very much centered on Persian art, culture, language, poetry, all the things that we love to celebrate, especially at this moment in history. So thank you so much, Dr. Diba, and now I invite Mariam Ekhtiar to do her introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Navina. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Mariam Ekhtiar. I'm curator in the Department of Islamic Art here at the Met, and it is my honor and pleasure to introduce tonight's esteemed speaker, Dr. Layla Diba. Dr. Layla Diba has been my mentor and cherished colleague for many years, and we've worked on several projects together. And she's also been a continued valued member of our department's visiting committee and a long-standing friend and supporter of our department. Tonight, my heart is heavy for all those affected by the current conflict. I'm certain that Dr. Diba's lecture entitled The Secret Life of Flowers, Reimagining the Persian Rose and Nightingale will offer solace and an opportunity to reflect on the richness, sophistication, and resilience of Persian art and culture. Layla Diba, I'm going to call her Layla Diba, is an independent art advisor, scholar, collector, and curator specializing in the art of 19th and 20th century Iran. An Iranian American herself, she has devoted her career to increasing understanding between Iranians and Americans through the arts. She held the post of director of and chief curator of the Negaristan Museum of 18th and 19th century Iranian art in Tehran from its inception in 1975 until 1978. After moving to the United States in 1979, she obtained her doctorate from the Institute of Fine Arts at New York University and became the Brooklyn Museum's curator of Islamic art from 1999 to 2000. During her tenure, she organized the highly successful exhibition Royal Persian Paintings, the Qajar Epoch, the first major international presentation of 18th, 19th century Persian art and culture. Subsequently, she continued her advisory and scholarly activities with other major American institutions and foundations. She also mentors many scholars and researchers, young scholars and researchers who turn to her as a research for documenting Iranian art history. In 2013-2014, Dr. Diba co-curated the groundbreaking exhibition Iran Modern at the Asia Society in New York and co-edited its accompanying publication. Her publications on Iranian and 19th and 20th century art include 3 monographs and over 50 scholarly articles. She is also a popular media personality and an expert on Iranian art and culture. Dr. Diba currently sits on the board of the Sudavar Memorial Foundation, on the advisory council of TIFAF, and on the visiting committees of the Islamic Art Department and the Department of Ancient West Asia at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. In recognition of her many contributions, Dr. Diba was awarded the Ellis Island Medal of Honor in 2024 and named an honorary fellow of the Association of Iranian Studies in 2024. Her current projects include Inventing the Modern Iranian Landscape, Kamal al-Mulk's paintings of Qajar, Iran, which will be published in a volume of the idea of Iran, entitled Qajar, Iran on the Cusp of Modernity, which is due to be released later this year. So with all this, please join me in welcoming Dr. Layla Diba. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. Delighted to see so many friends here tonight. Thank you so much, Navina and Mariam, for your wonderful introductions and for your expressions of friendship and solidarity. In a way, this evening's program is a reminder that great art is often conceived in the midst of chaos and destruction, but that art is eternal. I hope my lecture will provide some solace to members of our audience, and I humbly dedicate this lecture to the courageous youth of Iran in anticipation of a new day. I'm delighted and honored to be the latest speaker in the Annemarie Schimmel lecture series. I was a great admirer of Annemarie's and tremendously impressed by her superb command of Persian mystical poetry when she delivered a lecture at my invitation in 1996 at a Brooklyn Museum panel on the Rose and Nightingale, a lecture delivered entirely without notes and with her eyes closed shut, a feat I will not attempt tonight. At that time, my main concern was investigating the formal development of the theme of the rose, the gol, and its sub-theme, the rose and the nightingale, gol bulbul, in Persian art, and tracing its evolution over close to 600 years, that is, from the Mongol to the late Qajar area. Yet even then I questioned whether such a long history might not have deeper roots beyond the purely decorative function assigned to it by our Western methodology, a question first raised by Annemarie herself and that was supported by subsequent discussions with Mariam, whom I'm very grateful to for all her help with this lecture. This perception was recently reinforced by the discovery that the rose became synonymous for many with the nation of Persia itself, alongside the ubiquitous lion and sun motif. The rose even gave its name in 2017 to an exhibition of 19th century Persian Qajar art at the Louvre Lens, entitled L'Empire des Roses, chef-d'œuvre de l'art persan du XIXe siècle, attesting to the power of this theme. I was intrigued why, in the 21st century, such a seemingly Orientalist title was still considered appropriate. The answer, it seems, lies in the fascination Persian poetry and the rose exercised on the European imaginary, where the theme has been the subject of detailed investigation since the beginning of Orientalist studies in Europe in the 18th century, and poets such as Goethe, Wilde, and Rilke have been inspired by their Persian counterparts. The title of the exhibition was apparently borrowed from a 1704 French translation of the celebrated poet Saadi's Golestan, or Rose Garden, written more than 300 years earlier. And the translation was entitled not just Golestan, but L'Empire des Roses, Traité des mœurs des rois. The translator, a certain Claude Dallègue, interpreted the work more as a book of morals in the vein of the Mirrors for Princes genre, addressed to a ruler, certainly pertinent to 18th century France. The popularity of the rose and nightingale may also be linked to the culture of flowers, to use Jack Goody's phrase, shared between Asia and Europe. This image of Queen Marie Antoinette depicts her prominently holding a rose, symbol of purity and beauty, intended to counter the common perception of the queen as a flighty and luxury-loving sensualist. Thus, we see at the outset that our theme appears to be distinguished by its flexibility, longevity, and universal appeal. We will explore these features together, focusing on the Persian arts of the book, single-page painting, and lacquerwork. I should note here that iconographic analysis of vegetal ornament, which eventually came to be known as the arabesque, was an essential feature of early Islamic studies of German scholars. Our investigation, in a sense, follows in that tradition, although at first glance the humble rose does not seem to be a fit subject. Yet the rose was so powerful, it gave its name to the entire species of flower in Persian, and for close to 800 years, Persian poets, in their lyric and mystical works, have celebrated the rose and her nightingale as the symbol of earthly and spiritual love. You notice that I use the term her. Those of you familiar with Persian poetry know it is genderless, which has given rise to the identification of the beloved as male by most recent translators. However, the rose, or the beloved, is considered female, and the nightingale, her mystical lover, male. So I invite you to a promenade in the garden of Persian art, leaving room at the end, I don't know about that, but I hope, for your comments and questions. Before we delve into the subject, a few words on etymology and context. From an etymological viewpoint, gol is the generic term for flower, as well for different varieties of roses, such as the gol sorh and the gol mohammadi, and for other types of flowers, such as gol sombol or hyacinth. The term is also used in many compound forms, such as gulestan, rose garden, or Golbaz, flower lover, and is a popular personal name, as in Golnaz, delicate, or Golroch, rose face, youthful. The term Golistan was also used for poetic works such as the aforementioned Golistan of Saadi, or as the title of a treatise on calligrapher and painters, such as the Golistan-e-Hunar, the Rose Garden of Art, composed by the calligrapher Ghazi Ahmad Mir Munshi in 1607. Gul is a common figure of speech in Tarof, polite conversation, such as when a gentleman excuses a lady for turning her back on him with the charming sentiment, Gul poshtoru nadarat, a flower has no front or back. The rose traditionally played an integral role in the gracious customs of Persian social life and its refined cuisine. Rosewater golab is a common ingredient in Persian sweets, sherbets, and preserves, and rosewater glass sprinklers, golab pash, of which you see examples in the galleries, were used to refresh guests. Persian fondness for roses and flowers in general encouraged the art of artificial flower making, and paper flowers were described as popular in interior decoration for the cold winter months. The essential oil of roses, attar of roses, the distilled form of its perfume, can be documented in medieval Persian poetry and in 17th century European sources on Persia. Attar and rose petals were also a major export item throughout the region, and especially to India. Cities associated with the production of roses were Kashan, where vast rose gardens were planted for Golab, and Shiraz, whose gardens were profusely celebrated by its poets, especially Hafez. Persian gardens were divided by water channels and pools and planted with cypresses and rose bushes. The shade of the finest gardens frequently attracted the rose's counterpart, the nightingale. The poetic conceit that the nightingale's sweet lament is sung for its beloved, the rose, is based in part on the true characteristics of the bulbul, native to Western Asia, identified by its sweet or plaintive song. A migratory bird, the bulbul returns from its winter sojourn in Africa to mate in Persia between late April and June, when the roses bloom. The origins of the bird and flower theme may be traced to the very beginning of Persian manuscript illustration in the 14th century. The rose first appears as a discrete motif and a landscape element used in the illustration of epic and lyrical texts during the reign of the Mongols of Iran in the 13th and early 14th century. Its use as a poetic metaphor had already been long established since the golden age of Persian poetry, the 11th to 14th centuries, which witnessed the composition of the works of Ferdowsi, Attar, Rumi, Saadi, and Hafez, and this is important, predated its appearance in illustrated manuscript. Persian manuscript painters drew upon a reservoir of literary images of the rose as a metaphor for love and beauty to create symbolic compositions in the margins accompanying narrative scenes or lyrical landscapes evoking visions of springtime and young love. Such landscapes also suggested the pleasures of the gardens of paradise as described in the Quran, with their streams and beautiful angels, female huris and male youths, Qelman. From the mid-14th century onwards, both the Persian decorative repertory and the style and technique of manuscript painting were reinvigorated by a creative interaction with Chinese art, giving rise to a Perso-Chinese style. Manuscript illustration reflects the impact of Chinese brush painting and its use of more painterly brushstrokes, and as you can see here, of Chinese in the increasingly expressive treatment of nature and the introduction of chinoiserie landscape elements such as gnarled trees, wispy grass, curling cloud bands you can see in the sky, and flowering trees. And we also see the appearance of naturalistically rendered rose or peony bushes, as in this beautiful image from the Humayun, where the Persian prince Humayun, who you see on the bottom right, has fallen in love with the Persian princess and comes to court her in this beautiful springtime garden. You'll notice that the vegetation and the stance of the figures is similar, and it does seem as if the flowers and the rose trees are bending in sympathy with the two lovers. The association of flowers with earthly and divine love may be seen as well in a number of rare paintings on silk dating from the 15th century, attributed variously to Eastern Persia or Central Asia. These paintings clearly derive from Chinese paintings of the Sung dynasty. Chinese bird and flower painting conveyed many symbolic meanings, such as scholarly virtues, or reflected political events and personalities. These elements are altered to correspond to the Persian association of flowers with love, wine, and springtime, symbolizing different concerns from those of the Chinese artists. This painting depicts a princely couple seated outdoors on a carpet with a bowl of pomegranates, symbol of fertility in Persian culture, decanters of wine, a musician, and another attendant. In the foreground, a disproportionately large pheasant perches on a branch of flowering fruit trees. This painting illustrates a formative stage in the evolution of the theme from its Chinese prototypes towards an authentically Persian reimagining of the theme and the textless image. In the 16th century, the Safavid era, we see an evolution from chinoiserie to hybridity. The exquisite and luxuriously illustrated manuscripts created for Safavid princes and rulers features numerous landscape scenes in which may now be seen botanically accurate flowering roses and birds, clearly identifiable as nightingales, singing in their branches, as shown by many of Sheila Canby's studies. Illustrations to Ferdowsi's Shahnameh evoke his description of Mazandaran. The nightingales sit on every spray and pours his soft, melodious lay. Each rural spot its sweets discloses, each streamlet is the dew of roses. Alternatively, roses and other flowers are found in court portraits as an attribute symbolizing courtly elegance and refinement, and decorative margins and lacquered book bindings begin to exhibit realistically rendered flowering plants, rose bushes, and the rose and nightingale motif in lieu of chinoiserie black and gold designs. In the 17th century and later, the theme is reinvigorated, this time by European prototypes and by the emergence of single-page paintings and albums and its adoption for a wider variety of media. A novel hybrid style, known as Perso-European, sourced from European models or filtered through Mughal intermediaries, now entered the Persian decorative repertory. Floral studies are treated as an independent genre, not as illustrations to text, offering the viewer and the artist the possibility of associations, drawing on personal and collective memories and imagination. No longer confined to the arts of the book, these textless birds and flower designs are increasingly appreciated by connoisseurs and favored for textile patterns and lacquer-painted objects. Here we need to open a parenthesis about the evolution of flower painting in Europe. While fine flower paintings by Albrecht Dürer and Leonardo da Vinci are known, flower painting as an independent genre was a product of the 16th to 18th century. The age of exploration fostered a new culture of flowers in society and in the arts, a process to which Persia and other Asian countries significantly contributed. Many new types of flowering plants were recorded by agents of the Dutch and English East India companies. Flower paintings were commissioned from local artists, most successfully from Indian, Japanese, and Chinese painters. New plants were introduced into Europe, where their cultivation influenced the rise of gardens and horticulture. These included the tulip, native to Turkey and Western Asia, and the Persian 100-petal rose, the Rosa centifolia. These new variety of plants and flowers were recorded in the form of watercolors, printed books, herbals, and pattern books. Books of botanical drawings known as florilegium were widely dispersed. Flower painting was developed as a popular new genre by Jan Bruegel the Elder, Jan van Huysum, and other masters of Dutch still life painting. This was not coincidental, since Holland was the center for the cultivation of one of the most popular flowers, the tulip, and it was in Holland that the first instant of tulip craze occurred, tulipomania. Such developments did not leave Persia unaffected, as by the 17th century, its capital, Isfahan, became an international emporium of ideas, tastes, and fashions. European interest in horticulture undoubtedly stimulated a pre-existing love of Persia, of flowers in Safavid Persia. Indeed, there is considerable evidence for a craze of rosamania, to coin a phrase. Bird and flower designs play an increasingly important part in architectural decoration, as for instance in the painted decoration of Chehel Satoun Palace of Isfahan, constructed between 1647 and the 1660s. Travelers in the later 17th century frequently refer to the magnificent gardens of the Charbord, with its poplars and abundance of roses and jasmine. Jean Chardin lists 5 different varieties of roses, while Tavernier notes the custom of giving floral bouquets, and I'd like you to remember this, and the demand for new varieties of flowers at the court. A month-long festival of roses took place in the spring after the New Year. And as late as 1790, William Franklin noted that paintings and mirror cases were decorated with floral designs as part of the festivities. These references taken together convincingly evoke a luxury and pleasure-loving society, Such a culture of flowers could only have been made possible by the great economic prosperity of the Safavid period. The new impetus of European prototypes available in Isfahan is evidenced by an album of flower drawings by Shafi Abbasi, dated 1640s to 1670s, the principal artist associated with this new genre. Shafi Abbasi appropriated only the left side of this plate of flowers from John Dunstall's Third Book of Flowers, 1661. In another example, the traveler and painter Cornelis de Bruijn recorded a visit to an artist's atelier in 1714, where he met a Persian painter copying and coloring a Dutch book of flowers. Yet the profusion of floral types, wealth of botanical details, vivid coloring and shading of numerous wash drawings and illustrations to such manuscripts as this De Materia copy of Dioscorides in St. Petersburg indicate that local painters were inspired by the direct observation of indigenous Persian plant life, as well as by European prototypes. As a result of the new imagery, novel floral compositions prominently featuring the earthy mound from which the plant emerges, and sometimes incorporating insects and butterflies, were produced by Mughal, Persian, and Deccani painters and artists. This folio from the museum's Emperor Jahangir album, datable to the 1630s and 40s, features realistically rendered flowers in the margin, whose variety clearly reflects the Mughals' passion for flowers, yet also complements the sentiment of the poem in the center panel, as read by Annemarie, which extols the pain of loving the moon-faced beloved, a metaphor for the 14-year-old boy. The Ottoman painter Abdullah Bukhari's treatment of the theme also echoes floral imagery in Ottoman poetry of the period and anticipates later 19th century devotional associations of the rose with the Prophet Muhammad. The aforementioned Shafi Abbasi was the son of the celebrated master Reza Abbasi, and he's best remembered for his floral studies, some of which have been interpreted as designs for textiles, as discussed by Sheila Canby. A pen and ink wash drawing, now incorporating butterflies and bees and beetles, dated 1659-60, pictures a rose at the center, rendered in all its glory, fully opened, with its thorns and leaves, anchored in a mound of earth. Deep shading, curling of the leaves and differing angles, and especially the arm-like extended leaves, appear to evoke the stature and gracefulness of the beloved in Persian poetry, where the rose is sometimes referred to as the queen of the garden, or even as the sultan of the garden. The queen is flanked by her attendants, a smaller rose plant in the early stage of blossoming, and another plant also opening its bud. It is worth noting that thorn imagery, which you see the flower with her thorns, is very prominent in mystical poetry, as it represents the pain and suffering that inevitably accompanies true love. The rose is always attended by its thorns. The poem on the screen, as read by Mariam Ekhtiar, refers to mystical geometric themes and to the rose as a disdainful beloved, as she is sometimes described, and even to her perfume. Finally, the artist-poet wishes to have the flowers deposited on his grave. The text and image together create not just a beautiful image, but a sensual, oral, and personal experience. The poet could be the artist himself, and he may have had Sufi leanings, which was very common among artists and craftsmen. This animated floral study and the following one vividly bring to mind the Quranic condemnation of artists for usurping the role of creator. A painting of an iris by another proponent of the new style, the painter Muhammad Zaman, appears to be imbued with the same sap of life. So sensitively are the veins of the petals, buds, and leaves rendered. We must give a little time to the iris, who appears increasingly alongside our rose in floral compositions. The iris, or Susan, as she is called in Persian poetry. We initially thought it was zambar, but I came to the conclusion that zambar was simply for the wild lily, and that it was a form of lily, and so that in Persian poetry we find many references to Susan, but very little to zambar. This lily has been described as standing upright in the garden, like a ghazi or warrior by Rumi, and its petals are likened to tongues, visualized herein by the fleshiness of the petals. Later, the iris is associated with Imam Ali, anticipating later associations. This new hybrid floral vocabulary was particularly widespread in lacquer work, with pen boxes, mirrors, and trays embellished with dense, packed designs, often featuring nightingales against a profusion of small-scale flowers, nut branches, and tree trunks. In this medium, flower and bird designs were commonly combined with figural scenes and portrait designs in medallions and cartouches, or alternatively with poetic inscription. This preference for heterogeneous designs and themes, which you see in all the surfaces of this pen box, seems somewhat unfamiliar and incongruous to European taste, is a distinctive feature of the Safavid bird and flower tradition. Let us look at this magnificent early 18th century pen box, signed with one of the signatures on the top of Muhammad Zaman. It presents a seemingly erotic scene of three stages of an amorous encounter. 1, 2, 3. On the sides are portrait medallions of beautiful youths and maidens in landscapes. The interior is further embellished with flowering prunus trees, roses, nightingales, iris, and other flowers of our imaginary Persian garden. It has been proposed that if one reads the top scene from right to left, as in Persian texts, the scene actually represents the journey from sensual pleasure to divine love and mystical union. I've been somewhat skeptical in the past of this theory, but now we'll give it some credit, especially since it supports my interpretation, that the theme of love and paradise on the lid is echoed in the floral decoration of the pen box. And that the idealized youth and maiden on the sides evoked for the painter and for the audience metaphors of Persian poetry. This reading would give us a coherent interpretation of the imagery in 3 dimensions, not as a problematic, heterogeneous design with little or no connection. Now, not all works reflect a close relationship with mystical poetry, and many were intended as for the beautiful Safavid silk brocades of the era. Now, we'll see the culmination of this theme in the post-Safavid period. It would become the principal decorative mode for the 18th century in all media, a development in which the city of Shiraz and its traditions of poetry and gracious living played a key role. After the short-lived rule of Nader Shah, Shiraz became the political capital and artistic center of the Zand dynasty. Tilework revetments and carved marble dados of the Shiraz architectural monuments were adorned with sophisticated designs of trellises, floral bouquets, and flowering plants, many in Mughal style, introduced after Nader Shah's conquest of Delhi in 1739. Shiraz at this time was beautified with numerous new buildings and funeral gardens for its poets by the ruler Karim Khan Zand. The primary dated evidence for the Golubolbol tradition is the binding and margins of a sumptuous, oversized album in St. Petersburg, which contains 17th century Persian and Mughal paintings and 16th century calligraphies dated 1736 to 1751, that is bridging the reigns of Nader Shah and Karim Khan. It is one of a cluster of 4. Their shared features suggest that the principal artistic activity of this era was the preservation of the Safavid legacy in the forms of albums assembled from the remains of the royal Safavid and Mughal kitabkhanes. In a way, preserving the Safavid culture of flowers, which had been largely destroyed by the Afghan invasions of 1722. The binding and elaborate floral and illuminated margin designs were executed by the principal artists associated with the transmission of the Safavid style, Ali Ashraf, Muhammad Bagher, Muhammad Sadegh, and Muhammad Hadi. The binding by Ali Ashraf exhibits a carpet design featuring a medallion and pendants and an outer border of cartouches and medallions. Graceful birds are perched in a bower of botanically correct flowers set against a dark ground in the central medallion. The field is decorated with a design of rosa centifolia, chestnut branches, wild roses, and irises, but not random, against a system of scrolling vines. Great care has been expended to record the varieties and stages of maturity of the flowers, which are shown from different viewpoints. The binding is a virtuoso performance by an artist clearly in complete command of the new vocabulary. The composition, borders by its frame, evokes a garden in springtime within its walls. The abundance of flower recalls the richness of flora of earthly gardens. We may argue that works such as these, particularly examples with accompanying verses or portraits of Sufis and mystical poets, visualize paradisical and mystical themes, such as man's eternal search for union with God, symbolized in the image of the soul bird's love of the rose, as it is sung in the work of Attar, the Conference of the Birds. The second is a complete album in the Golestan Palace Museum, almost entirely devoted to the work of Muhammad Bagher, principally his floral studies dated to the 1760s and 70s, which is shown here with a later version, compiled over 2 centuries and finally completed with a new binding for the ruler Nasruddin Shah in 1882-3. The margins are also of the later date. Bagher's work represents the reimagining of the Safavid model. Here the rose is showcased and enlarged and rendered with much greater modeling and animation, so it appears more and more as a portrait or a lifelike presence. You'll note 2 new features. The thorns have been banished and the branches are now broken. To the right is another version that was either copied from the Bagher painting or from its European prototype, showing the continuity of the theme in the 19th century. Bagher becomes a master of black and white ink wash drawing, creating a whole new genre resulting from a creative process with foreign models, but is also proficient in watercolor, as in this beautiful pink rose formerly in the Aga Khan collection. This new visual language is clearly related to interaction with European prints and drawings of this period, which would still have been available to the artists and which predate the works of the most celebrated French floral painter, Pierre-Joseph Redouté. Etchings particularly, and this is an engraving, but very finely modeled. These are etchings where you can see the velvety texture and the softer modeling that you get with etchings, and which I think would have pleased Muhammad Bagher. The third album, Incomplete, and there were also, by the way, beautiful full-color prints appearing at this time. The third album, Incomplete, appeared on the Paris market in 1982 and still retains its original lacquer binding with images of poets. and it is composed of 38 folios of Mughal paintings, Persian copies of Mughal originals, and of European prints, intermixed with 16th century Persian calligraphy in a mirror-like configuration. Most interesting for our purposes is a double page showing on the right a well-known scene from Sadi's Golestan, the old Ghazi surprised with a young boy, and on the left, a night scene of a princely couple on a terrace. But what interests us is the large pink rose at the very top. What is it doing there? It appears to be growing out of the illuminated margins, and its deliberate placement can now be understood as an image of earthly love, perhaps even indicating a preference for same-sex relations, since it's above the image of the Ghazi. And I think it is an intervention by the artist. This reading would have been impossible without understanding the prevalence of such imagery in Persian poetry. Alternatively, the rose may be blessing both unions. The last example from this cluster is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art itself, the celebrated Davis album. The album of 34 folios of paintings is complete, as attested to by the list of contents recently discovered by Mariam and myself. This is remarkable to have such a list of contents. What unites them are the magnificent binding, here you go again, go back to the binding, and the margins. The binding, signed by Muhammad Zaman II and dated 1802, displays a design paying homage to the Ali Ashraf binding, featuring large-scale floating flowers still on a scrolling vine on an earth-colored ground whose shadows give a sense of space and recession. The four floral borders assigned to Muhammad Bauhen in his school display large-scale individual flowering plants in a rose pink palette, and at its center, an image of a Russian ambassador, for which I would not propose a mystical interpretation. In the upper section of the margins, you may recognize the design of flowering trees with their prominent barks from the early 18th century. You have to look very hard, but there they are. And here again, this iris, which is coming to displace my rose, which makes me very upset. Two works will suffice to visualize the lacquer of this era. This detached mirror case and shutter by Muhammad Hadi, the Bird and Flowers by Muhammad Hadi, and Muhammad Hassan represents the painting, the pairing of the rose and nightingale with spiritual themes. In this case, the visit of the Mughal prince Dara Shikoh to a sage. And the final works from this period is represented by this surgeon's instrument case from the Metropolitan Museum collection by Baugher, dated 1789. Here, our theme is paired again with a purely courtly secular love scene, which I don't think can be interpreted in mystical terms, emphasizing the multivalent character of this theme and its widespread appeal. Flower and bird compositions were increasingly utilized for the embellishment of lacquer-painted bindings of religious texts and Qurans, evoking the metaphor of the Rosa centifolia as a manuscript and its leaves as folios. In the words of Omar Khayyam, alas that spring should vanish with the rose, that youth's sweet-scented manuscript should close. Roses were especially favored for these bindings as symbols of the Prophet Muhammad, who was said to have created the rose from a drop of his pearl-like perspiration. Qajar dynasty was founded by Agha Muhammad Qajar, a calculating and brutal leader who reportedly said, "I have shed all this blood so Baba Khan, his nephew and successor, may reign in peace." Indeed, the Qajar era would last well into the early 20th century. The second ruler was determined to create a brilliant court in Tehran, the new capital, and establish himself and his dynasty at home and abroad. He considered himself a great poet in the Shiraz tradition and fostered a revival of classical poetry known as Bazgasht. Fath Ali Shah also built numerous new palaces for himself and his considerable progeny. He had almost 100 children, whose decoration was primarily, not from one wife, by the way, whose decoration was primarily wall paintings of the ruler and his court at war, at play, and enthroned, thus ushering in a new age of life-size and monumental figural paintings so powerful that they were venerated as religious icons by his Persian subjects. The English traveler Robert Kerr Porter's 1821 description of the Negaristan Palace's court reception murals and its gardens is one of the most important primary sources for Qajar art. He writes admiringly of the tall, flowering rose trees of the garden, known as Nastaran, probably the English sweetbriar, and says, "In no country of the world does the rose grow in such perfection as in Persia. In no country is it so cultivated and prized by the natives, from the rulers to the humblest individuals." He says that even a humble individual feels a double enjoyment when he finds a rosebud stuck into his kaliyun. This quote, I think, illustrates how deeply the rose is embedded in the national psyche. Now we will speak of the rose and nightingale, which has its own power, the power of poetry, illusion, and memory. The image of the rose by itself, with the nightingale, and with other flowers of the garden, and in association with poetry, reaches its culmination in this era. The sensitive ink wash drawing that we showed before exemplifies both the eternal appeal of the perfect rose and the relationship of this type of imagery to its poetic sources. It's shown in all its transiency, full bloom, bud, and broken stems, an image poignantly evoking the passage of time. This form of the rose, petals about to fall and die, may be linked on the one hand to the Victorian fascination with the rose as a symbol of mortality, a cliche of Orientalist literature and Persian poetic translation, but on the other hand to the Persian sensibility of the rose, which is a well-known metaphor for mortality in the poetry of Hafez and Saadi. According to its description, this work was dedicated to Fath Ali Shah and completed in 1800. But more interestingly, it bears a later inscription dated 1943, written by Mehdi Bayani, a later owner and one of Iran's most eminent scholars, which identifies this work as a New Year's offering to a friend. So we were talking about this tradition of gift-giving of flowers or representations of flowers when you didn't have real ones, a custom you'll recall from the Safavid period. Bayani adds a quatrain by Saadi in his fine Shikaste Nastali script, which serves as a commentary on the image, evoking the impermanence of life's rose gardens and offering eternal happy in this rose garden of art. Illustrated manuscripts sometimes also visualize the relationship with poetry. Here, in this rare illustration, the nightingale on the left, singing in the rose tree on the left of the image, inspires an aged poet seated in the garden, flanked by blossoming trees. The scene takes place at night, as is shown by the candle, and the poet is seated on a tiger skin, an indication of his mystical status, as the tiger skin is often an attribute of dervishes. The luxury court arts are materialized by this gold enameled tray sent to the Russian ruler by Fath Ali Shah. The tray presents masses of free-floating flowers within cloud formation around a central medallion bearing the Lion and Sun. These larger, freer flower forms succeed the carpet composition with smaller blooms of Ali Ashraf. I also propose a renewed interaction with Chinese art seen in the similarity to Famille Rose's porcelain design and to its pink palette. Also notable is a symbiosis of the lion and sun with the rose, a seemingly incongruous pairing, which could be seen to visualize two aspects of power in Iran, soft and hard power. The same free-floating, airy design with large blooms where the rose is displaced by the iris is found in this royal casket. The final work from this era is another portrait of a rose in a very delicate wash technique by Muhammad Hassan, dated 1834. The rose is dying, her petals shriveled, about to fall, her stem bent from the weight of time and the seasons. Yet the signs of renewal are there in the small buds waiting to open. It is a very moving image in dialogue with Muhammad Bagher's rose. The work's inscription tell us that this is a gift for Lot Ali Khan, whom he calls the light of my eyes, Cheshme Nuriman, a term of Nuri Cheshmeman, a term of endearment for a relative or student, establishing a line of succession, a silsile, from the early to the late Qajar period. Remarkably, it also tells us that the artist was suffering from a toothache. We get all kinds of details about Persian artists. The reign of the next ruler was short and of little concern for us, but the Nasri era from 1848 to 1896 was to bear witness to another major shift in our theme. The era was a very long one and witnessed a precarious balance between conservatism and modernity and East and West. It was an age of imperialism, colonialism, and European cultural and economic penetration, which ironically stimulated the production of Persian lacquerwork and the universal success of our theme, but ultimately led to a sort of mass production and increased eclecticism. A renewed interest in religion, on the other hand, as described by Mariam Ikhtiar, sees the rise of mysticism and Shiism at all levels of society, but was especially supported by Nasruddin Shah, whose portraits show him wearing a medallion with the image of Imam Ali, the son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad. While life-size painting declines in favor of European-style painting, as in the work of Kamal el-Mulk, manuscript painting is replaced by lacquerwork, which has survived in considerable numbers compared to the earlier periods. The lacquerwork was ornamented with many small-scale designs, so it really appeared to be the miniature style, which appealed to both European and local patrons. Claudius Rich visited the painter Muhammad Hadi, who was still alive in 1821, and described him with great admiration as the Persian Van Huysum. And other 19th century observers expressed great admiration for lacquerwork. Lacquerware is particularly mirror cases where the exterior displayed the Rose and Nightingale theme, but the inside pictured personal or spiritual messages became very popular for direct and indirect representations of the Imam Ali, shown frequently with his family and his followers. Mirror cases held a special appeal because of the frequency of mirror imagery in Persian mystical poetry and in Sufi practices, meditational practices, which used the mirror. Many of the poems are inscribed on the lacquerwork and give it a very special refinement. This 1844 mirror case is decorated with two beautiful irises on the inside, whose elegance and stature recall Muhammad's rendering of 200 years previously. And because of the iris metaphor in poetry, it seems appropriate to evoke Imam Ali. The next example goes even further. By Agha Ahmad, again in the museum's collection, shows a large iris flanked by two smaller figures at the top, let's see, on either side, One is the Imam Ali, the other is companion Gambar. The quatrains at the bottom, which have been read by Mariam, describe the mirror as a reflection of the beauty of Imam Ali as well as of the owner. A final example is in the Baron Museum. Unfortunately, we don't have an image, but it combines Alid imagery with exterior floral designs. The next three works feature actual images of the haloed Imam Ali, known as Shamayel, represented kneeling. There he is on the interior, and holding his sword, Zulfaqar. And on the interior, there's another example in the Khalili collection. And here, on the interior of the Quran, with his sons and companions, painted by the great Muhammad Ismail. Sometimes the aura of holiness could be transferred to the ruler, as indicated by the inscription on this mirror case. You can read the inscription and its translation there. In other media, Imam Ali is also represented with roses, as in these two watercolors. This remarkable pen box, with its rich imagery of heaven and hell and Napoleonic wars, was greatly admired by the traveler Homer de Hell et Tabriz in 1847, and later acquired by a European collector. The inscription documents that two artists worked on it over a period of 20 years. The first was Muhammad Hassan Afshar, who met de Hell. The second artist, Esmail Jaloyer, who had Sufi leanings, added a battle scene of the Perso-Afghan wars and his personal vision of paradise. So you can see the vision of paradise there and here. Very personal. We see masked roses and nightingales and two beautiful youths inviting us into the picture. And this is one of the most poetic evocations I know of. Note that violets are placed under the inscription, recording the process and its history. And here again, we come back to the symbolic references we can intuit. Violets represent humility, and its color references the dark blue robes of Sufis, all of which make sense in terms of Jaloyer's Sufi beliefs. And in terms here, we see the agency of the artist to introduce themes that are personal to him, even in court commissions. The popularity of this theme, especially in Shiraz, led to the dominance of families of artists and ateliers, such as those of Najaf and the Suratgar family, the Imami family in Esfahan, which could replicate the same designs practically ad infinitum, such as in this grouping of works by Fatullah Shirazi, which the museum was able to acquire. The later history of Rose and Nightingale is also entwined with the dissemination of print culture in Iran. Printed books were copied for their bird images, and popular mass-produced printed imagraphs, chromolithographs, were used by artists to create individual hand-painted watercolors, such as this hand holding a rose by Lutf Ali Suratgar, which is actually a study for a Quran binding of 1861 dedicated to the ruler in the Golestan Palace Library. The same artist is responsible for the decoration, magnificent decoration, for this mid-century reception room in the mansion of Qavamed Dole, the important connoisseur and patron in Tehran, which still exists today and which I actually visited in 1977-78. Lutf Ali proudly signed the paintings, which is right down there, very unusual, which magnificently evoke in 3 dimensions the gardens and poetry of Shiraz of yore. Significantly, another room is decorated with European prints of damsels in a mirrorwork design, a more cosmopolitan and modern decor fitting the era. here is another view before restoration. I actually saw it after restoration, but this book is from a year before. And here's a wonderful close-up showing the detail of these painted muqarnas scenes. Excuse me? It should. It may not tomorrow. No, it existed in, when I saw it in the late 70s, and it's a masterpiece, a masterwork in downtown Tehran, which is so amazing. So I do hope that it's not near any, sort of military targets, and that it will survive, because it's a tremendous example of restoration. Anyway, so hopefully it's still there. Anyone who has contacts in Iran, let me know. The Rose and Nightingale was also the principal theme for furniture design for either a Persian or European clientele, but ultimately wound up in America. This magnificent table, one of a cluster of 4, was made in Tehran and painted with masked roses, the lion and sun, and inscribed with verses by Hafez and the 19th century poet Ghani, and even including a dedication to the U.S. envoy to Persia as the person who commissioned it. His name is not given, but it was S.G.W. Benjamin. Now, in Olana, Frederick Church's mansion on the Hudson, which many of you know well, it is not actually on view in Olana, it is in storage. So it was in Frederick Church's mansion, and he had acquired it from a certain Mr. Whipple from Tabriz, who's identified as the owner of one of the other tables. Our discussion of the Rose and Nightingale can even pertain to the modern era, as it helps us to understand this somewhat subversive portrait of the legendary Persian hero Rostam, represented as a wrestler by the contemporary artist Feridun Ov. With our newfound understanding of Persian psyche, we can now read this image of a wrestler arising as if reborn like a chrysalis out of a bouquet of roses, questioning our notions of masculinity already encountered in the Ghilman of Persian poetry. Furthermore, the Shirazi mystical poet Ruzbahan Bekli speaks of a vision of clouds of roses, such a vivid image which may be alluded to here. We may also return to this image of a European beauty and her counterpart, the rose, and use our imagination to see this through the eyes of the poet and the painter. Her cheeks like roses, her eyes like jonquils, her rosebud lips, and her face as a garden of beauty. And we may ponder how much this reimagining has added to our understanding and appreciation of Persian art. Let us part with real roses in a real garden in Gorgan on the Caspian Sea, and with the words of Rumi, "When the rose is gone and the garden faded, you will no longer hear the nightingale song." Thank you.
I think I speak on behalf of all of us here when I say thank you so much for an extraordinary talk, an uplifting subject, a profound topic, and something that we all needed to be reminded of today. Much, much appreciation. And thank you, Layla, so much. Again, many, many thanks.